Way down the valley, I saw the light. Deep down by the water, I saw the light. Philosophy cannot feed the belly of a hungry man. I gave you food and clothing, knowledge, but you had another plan. Set agenda, won't avenge you, for I know the main source will deal with what needs to be sorted. I never listened to my angels, they were speaking loud and clear. Bitterness, no consciousness, you put me in a valley, yes. You came to break my spirit, were you working for the man? You wore the holy colors, but in higher paths I must have sold well. My history tells me that this mountaintop I have to climb. You said I'd never get my confidence, pray watch me shine. I'm guided by my God, Selassie, Allah, Krishna, Jesus came to make everybody shine. What did you see? I know I can't hard, it don't pay sometimes, but I pray for thee, for love destroys all negativity. I know I can't hard, it don't pay sometimes. If I could look up, I can get up heaven, pull me out the valley. Down the valley, I saw the light. Deep down by the water, I saw the light. I walked, I screamed, and the angels, they picked me up from a bit of pain. I know for sure that I will walk that mountain again. I'm Julie Anderson, way down in the valley. You must climb every mountain. Hurdles, obstacles, pitfalls. If you look up, you can get up and on your hiking boots and climb the mountaintop betrayal. Hurt you, lost your job, lost the plot, lost the lot. Love is a medicine, my source is a healer. So you're in a valley deep and dark and silent, then conjure up the strength within. For no matter where you are, there is value in the valley. Evil times to root is where there's even men called Delilah who sell out their brothers. Eastern memories feed my energies, lights in all the city. All is water, one is all the trumpets, cause you're to the mountaintop. Divine is always with you, stop the weeping. A rope of faith will heal wounds, no doubt you keep believing. Remind yourself of those who made it up the mountain before, for nothing is impossible with the main source. Down the valley, I saw the light. Deep down by the water, I saw the light. I walked, I screamed, and the angels, they picked me up from a bit of pain. I know for sure that I will walk that mountain again. Way down the valley, I saw the light. Way down in the valley, I saw the light in the valley. Way in the valley, I saw the light way down in the valley. I saw the light way down in the valley. Away in the valley. I saw the light way down in the valley. I saw the light way down in the
Hey, this is Glow with the Flow podcast with Kiz from Hip Hop Heals, Greg from Making Change Studios, Ben from Let's Feed Brum, and we've got a special guest MC, Applz from Birmingham Town.
Hi, good evening.
Welcome.
Good afternoon and welcome.
In the studio today, we've been gassing, and it's been hard not to keep talking. We could have been here for another 2 hours and not recorded the podcast. So I've basically told everybody to shut up and let's share some stories. So we've just been talking about our live music fundraiser on Saturday the 3rd of October, Dubgasm, and the reason we're doing that The reason is we're collecting money to run MC workshops because we want to improve MC bars with the younger generation. Culture's getting a bit diluted. We've got lots of different spectrums of drum and bass and ragga dancehall MC culture infusing through the current jungle and drum and bass spectrum. But yeah, I was just saying, for 20 years I've been watching things get diluted from really, originator sound system crews down to a generation of people that are copying basically MC Bassman, which if you don't know, it sounds, it's a bit hilarious, bit comical, doesn't really make sense, and yeah, just pretty monotonous. But yeah, if you're a bassman, sorry mate, your bars suck. Exactly on. Oh God. So we're doing a crowdfunder because we want to do MC workshops also to spread the therapeutic powers of hip hop to people who are disadvantaged. So on a serious note, we've got Ben Rafiki here, who I've worked with in Let's Feed Brum's sister company, Homeless Shelter, Tabor House. The poetry therapy style workshops were so successful. We saw, as we mentioned in our previous podcast, we saw real growth and human connection and confidence and spiritual growth between all of us. And yeah, I'm getting all teary thinking about it because it was such a special time, and I learned a lot from the people that I met, and it kind of evolved because we didn't really use any of the plans that I had. I made a program, I set up resources, all went down the pan. Turns out not many people spoke English, so I used my other special powers to evoke poetry in that situation. And being an English teacher and having 20 years of experience working with people with low levels of literacy, in deprivation, in poverty, I've learned quite a lot about how to just work with people on a human to human basis. And that doesn't always, the circumstances you're in don't always allow that. So there are systems that operate that keep us from gelling with individuals that we're with. And one of those things is the kind of psychotherapeutic models that you get through the doctors, or the language that doctors speak and counsellors sometimes use, or the idea of where they're from and the backgrounds from where they're from. So we want to inspire action today through this podcast by getting you to work out how you can break barriers between people in your community, make change and be creative. Because when you're creative, you're happy, healthy, and you do good. So on that note, we're going to just go around the room and share a story from when we all grew up, just to set the scene of who we are, because we've got many different cultures, races, ages in our podcast community. Me, Ben and Greg are just going to be hosting a whole load of social activists, poets, performers, MCs to share inner wisdom with you. And let's start with Greg. Oh. Yeah, so where are you from, Greg?
I'm from Birmingham.
Where did Greg begin?
I was born in Handsworth. Well, I was born on City Road Hospital. I was living in Handsworth at the time. My dad was a caretaker of Handsworth Grammar. We moved over.
Can you just contextualise what Handsworth Grammar is?
Handsworth Grammar, the school.
Somebody's listening from another country.
Okay. Handsworth Grammar is a grammar school in the middle of Handsworth. I can't say much about it really because I was so young.
Yeah.
But my dad was a caretaker. He went from there to caretaker at a couple of other schools, and so we moved around a lot. I remember moving a lot as a kid, and I think I think it helped me more than a hindrance. I think people kind of discouraged moving around from school to school.
I can't get the image of caretaker Willie out of Simpsons out my head.
Where's your trousers, lad? So, yeah, same thing. Yeah.
Okay. Wait, wasn't he Scottish?
Willie.
Wasn't he Scottish?
Yeah. My dad
he was Scottish.
Half Welsh though, so it was like. Yeah, groundskeeper Willie, that was my dad. Yeah, it was loosely based on my dad. Yeah.
Okay, so you moved around, but it didn't affect you.
We went to Moseley, Spark, Brook. We went to Sturchley, Cottridge, Longbridge, all over the place. Man. So I moved from one end of the city to the complete other side, and that's kind of where I am now. But I don't think it was a hindrance to me. I really think it helped me to meet people and to get to know people a bit better because I had to at that age. Like I had to keep doing it, and now I don't have an issue with it. And yeah, I saw lots of different cultures and races from the different schools I went to. Like I moved from a predominantly black and Asian area to a predominantly white area. So I don't know how it made me feel. I think when I came over this end, I definitely experienced more, I won't say adversity, but questions. Why is your hair like that? That kind of thing.
Just to let you know, Greg is mixed race, so his hair's quite like curly and thick.
Yes, unlike me.
I was just going to say
no, you wasn't
really
gonna say
insulting.
That. You was going to say the
I was going to
opposite.
say that.
But yeah, that's a little story about me. I moved around a lot as a kid, and here I am now.
All right, moving on.
We're glad you're here, Greg.
Yes.
So, Benjamin, you have a unusual story from your background, don't you?
Yeah, a little bit. I wasn't born in this country. I was born in Indonesia, but I grew up in Birmingham. So I kind of count myself as a Brummie, and it feels like it's my home. What I want to talk about, though, is when I walked in, there was this conversation about the elder generation.
Into this room tonight.
Room tonight.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to tell a story, actually, about my father.
That's it. I interrupted you at that point and said,
You
look, we
did.
need to get this on the podcast.
So I lived with my father the last 7 years of his life. And he passed away at the age of 93 about 2 years ago. Now, he was born and brought up, and all his early life up to 17 years old, in the valley of Kashmir in North India. He was born in 1925. So we are going back 95 years from as we speak today. So he would tell us stories about the first radio in the village. So somebody got a radio and it was in one person's house, and so everybody in the village would come and listen to it. The first telephone in the village. The person who had the house was an important person in the village. So that telephone was like there was always someone sat next to it, and everyone would come and receive and make phone calls from that telephone. That was before there was really any form of international flight. No TVs. Obviously, no computers, no phones, no mobile phones, none of that. So he grew up in a place where everybody lived off the land. There were farms, people grew things, they shared with each other things. I mean, there were shops, but it was like you'd go to the nearest town and there would be a market. And then there were some incredible stories, like men used to go up into the mountains and they would cut massive chunks of ice and they'd bring them down into the valley and go door to door, and you'd buy ice off them and you'd pack one of the little rooms in the house and that would be your fridge. So that's what he grew up in. And he grew up and he was a walker, a hiker. He'd walk in the hills. You know, he learnt to ride horses. He would go in the streams, go up the mountains, go to the lodges. His time was spent really out in the countryside. Like that kind of life was the life he had. Now, he was a clever guy. He qualified as a doctor. And when he came to this country, because it was actually accidental in many ways, he came here and that was his work. And then obviously he ended up in the 20th century, the 21st century. He was very adaptable. He learned to use a computer or a mobile phone, all these things. And it was like many, many times, I used to think, they built people differently in the past, Things where in my generation and the younger generation where people kind of struggle with things. I mean, they had to deal with impossible situations and there was always a way. They always found a way. His resilience was off the scale. The last few years of his life, he had a bus pass. He'd travel around on the buses. He told me this really funny story one day when he had to help this guy onto the bus because the guy was struggling with his shopping. And he helped the guy on the bus and they sat next to each other and they were talking. And the guy said to him, really appreciate you helping me because, obviously I'm kind of older, and and you've helped me on the bus, and thank you for that. So he goes, so how, I'm 73, and how old are you? And he goes, well, at that time he was like 89 or something. He was delighted to tell me the story because he was fine, and he was fine really up to the last few days. He was walking, never needed any help and stuff like that. But I just wanted to say that what you were talking about, which was this idea of that older generation and the elders amongst us, it is incredibly valuable. They have inside them knowledge and experience that we're fools if we don't tap into it, and you were talking about that. Maybe this is an intro for you to now tell us what you've been doing, and that interesting work that you've been doing. But that's my story, and here, ladies and gentlemen, is Applz.
Yes, brilliant. Hi, Applz, but Sandra Carter, you can call me. Either either, Applz or Sand. To echo what you were saying about the stories of age, there's one thing that I was saying earlier. I just heard myself. Right, there's one thing I just was talking about earlier. Was the history. There's an old African proverb saying that when an elder dies, we lose a library. And it's just so imperative to gain as much knowledge as we can from our elders. It doesn't have to be in your 60s and 70s. My mum passed at 90. My dad was in his 80s. So they lived a very wholesome life. So I was very privileged to get so much knowledge and information. A story that I can think of that just comes to mind, which spurred me to be entrepreneurial, was the blessings of my parents. My mum was a seamstress. She came from Jamaica. She was trained to be a nurse, but she came to this country. She couldn't get a job. And we all know why. I have to say, I'm coming from a Caribbean background. My mum and my dad were Jamaican. And coming back into this country, she had all the skills. She did a junior Cambridge when she was in Jamaica. She was very affluent and intelligent. Coming over here to start a new life for her family, it wasn't, as they said, the world or the roads were paved with gold. It wasn't that story, what they got. It was, living in multiple factory-looking houses. They were shocked and horrified. But I want to roll on for something that I will say that's very inspirational for my parents at that time. Basically, I was in my, I think around 9 or 10, I wanted to go to this stage school. I wanted to dance and ballet and all this sort of thing. And I know they couldn't afford it. And I'm not a fan of dogs. I love cats, but I'm not a great fan of dogs. I don't not love them, but I'm not so much a fan, right? So the only way I could think of, how am I going to get into this stage school? I really want to dance. I really want to learn ballet and tap dancing and everything else. So there was an opportunity for me to walk some people's dogs to get 5 pence and 10 pence and things like that. That was like, I don't know, £1 in our time, or, So I was walking these dogs, and then my dad said to my mum, this is what they told me earlier, like, why is Sandra going out early before she goes to junior school? And what is she doing? Right, so he followed me one morning, and then he seen me walking the dogs, cussing out these dogs, walking down the road with these dogs, like, because I don't like them, but come on, hurry up. Right, so I walked them back, and I did it for the elderly. There was old people there as well. So I walked the dogs, dropped them off, and then I went to school, came back home. My parents sat me down in the chair, and they said, well, Sandra, what have you been doing this morning? And I thought, I'm going to get into trouble, and I burst into tears. And my dad says, okay. He said, all right. Why was he walking the dogs? I explained. And I said, I know you guys never had it. So I was making a way for me to, come up with that money. So my dad said, how much is it for this stage school? I went £50. That's, in our time, probably £300, £400 from a family's household pocket. That was so much money they gave me. But they gave it me and they said, go to your stage school. Oh. Yeah. And I know that in my mind, in your mind, in our mind here, I know that they suffered from something by giving me that, but they invested in what I was doing. And that was my kickstart of me being an entrepreneur. Because I thought, okay, if you want to achieve something and there's no money around, there's something you can do, right, which is of the law, to make a way for yourself and become more fearless. So throughout my walk of life and creativity, I owe it to my parents because they made me become fearless in creativity. Just be it, do it, be free. Didn't understand the hip hop so much, maybe because it was all piled in my bedroom at the time. and there was incense burning and stuff. But they gave me that space to really expand on who I am. I'm a fashion designer as well. I learned sewing, seamstressing since I was 6 from my mum. My dad, like you were saying earlier about your father, he was a farmer in Jamaica as well. And he carried on those skills in, metropolitan gardens. We grew potatoes, yam and peas and strawberries and things like that. So it was like, I don't know, I'm very privileged to know that they gave me a rich culture, talking about their ghost stories and doppy and this and all sorts of stuff. And food. My great grandma was a herbalist. So my mom taught me a little bit about herbs. I've kind of lost my way about all of that, but I want to learn more about that sort of agriculture so that I can pass that on as well. So yeah, I'm very privileged to know that they gave me a lot of different parts of who I am now. And yeah, it's important. It's important to make sure we speak to our elders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With my dad, when he passed on, he had a problem with his liver that was just autoimmune disease. It just started to eat itself. It's just rare condition, and he just passed away. So it was like he really struggled with the idea of going, because he didn't want to leave us, and he was really devastated at leaving my mum, because he used to do everything for my mum. He loved her so much. He used to literally treat her like a queen, and she is sickly, and so he puts he put a lot of heart and soul into making sure that she didn't have to struggle or suffer, or to try and make her illness a little bit less painful for her, right? So he was working hard, he'd do everything, and if she was feeling really ill, he'd come up and cook as well, and cook her breakfast, lunch, dinner, clean up, everything, housework. If she was on a down spiral, that's what would happen. So that was towards the end of his own life, when he's ill. And so he just kept struggling through. And I felt so bad filming or recording him. I asked him for some stories on his deathbed, and it was just grim, because we were in the palliative care unit. I tried to talk to him before, and he was down, depressed. He didn't want to talk. And it's precious if you can connect with somebody in that space, but also you have to be careful of their own dignity and the need for privacy. So I beg, please, before it's too late and you're in the situation I was in, because I've grown up hearing my dad tell me stories from when I was young. So my growing up story is that from being a child, I just spend time with my dad, and he'd tell me stories from Aesop's tales, from gurus in India. He'd tell me stories about moral tales with animals in the jungle, but from India, folklore, legends, myths. He'd just be he's a poet. He used to write all the time, every single day. He used to take me everywhere, and we'd be driving along in the car. He'd pull over, and I'd just be sitting there in the car, and my dad had just stopped driving, and I'd be like, "Dad, what you doing?" And he'd say, "I'm writing a poem." And so I was like, at the point, these are my earliest memories, where my head was up to the wind-up window arm, and the seatbelt was about 50 times bigger than me. And he would say, "I'm writing a poem." So my concept of what a poem is came from him saying a poem is a way of sharing the most meaning with the least words. And that stuck with me, and it's rooted inside me in a way that those words have developed and helped me to expand into who I am. And I'm, through his loss, his sad loss, R.I.P. Dad, he unblocked a creative writing block in me that started 10 years before, when my sister passed on in a car accident. So although I hadn't written, I dabbled, and it was weak, but I still had a block. So for the 10 years, while I was going through psychological mayhem and undiagnosed trauma, PTSD, blah, 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 the creativity just went into a dark cave inside myself, because I wasn't who I was. I became something else, and it was like I had a frozen heart in shock. But it lasted for that 10 years, and the ripple effect was through my creativity. And I was just saying to these guys in the studio tonight that I had a blub earlier because I was moved by something, and then yesterday I was having a blub because I was moved by something else, and that's my natural makeup. If I'm not crying at the news or emotional at Lion King, I'm not my Kizzy self. You know what I mean? So for me to have 10 years where I'm like, nothing is affecting me, I'm just like a robot, I'm just pretending I'm here, but I'm not. It was like being in some psychological prison, but I didn't know I was in there. I thought I was kind of okay. I just thought that was life. But when I woke up from that is when my dad, he was terminal, and I thought, I don't want to go through the same stuff with emotional blockage. I need to work out a way that I'm not ruining myself, because I won't stay alive through another death, basically, to put it bluntly. And learnt about writing therapy, and then what my dad said about sharing the most meaning with the least words. It just, for me, it just started because I wrote a poem. And the poem was because I had this acronym in my head, RTA, road traffic accident. And in my head, because I was feeling for the first time in ages with my dad dying, I had to have a extra grieving for my sister, which had never really happened, right? So it only started a few years before, when I'd had a breakdown from the repression, right? I had a delayed grief reaction after 7 years. So the next 3 years up until when my dad died, I was in a emotional opening, like a transition point, and the pain that was in there was getting processed. But it wasn't till my dad died that I was able to articulate that pain, because I didn't have words for it, because I was frozen. And that's what PTSD does and trauma does. Your senses, sounds, smells, sights, everything is in chaos. You're split and your experience doesn't make sense. So you are acting on some mad inner instinct that does not make you a functional human being, and it's scary because you're not in control of yourself. And I just, after 2 weeks of having a recent flashback, I managed to stabilise my adrenaline and stuff using CBD oil, which I didn't know could be used to help your hormonal imbalances with PTSD. So for me, that was just a lifeline to get back out of like a crazy headspace. So with the poetry, I wrote this poem because I could just hear RTA in my head. I woke up one day and I just had RTA, 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 road traffic accident, reach through anguish, I think, was the first line. And then I kept making up other words for the RTA acronym. And it just ended up in a really organised, tightly structured poem that was like beyond what I thought I was capable. And it just spat out onto the paper. And I was like, what the heck is that? I can't believe I've just written that. Looked at it the next day, I was like, whoa, did I write that? 3 days later, I'm like, oh my God, what's this? Somebody like came and took my pen over. I started getting poltergeist stuff happen. And then I started to write. And the poems started to come out of me, and they were fully formed, no thought. Like I was an express train creative. And then it took me about 3 years to say I'm a poet. But then what is a poet? It's just expressing the most meaning with the least words. So I want to ask you now, Applz, with poetry and MC culture and lyricism all being intertwined, one of the reasons for us to use this podcast is to explain what hip hop therapy is, so that people can engage in it and we can bring it to the UK and people can get benefit. So a lot of people don't understand how hip hop can be therapeutic. And one of the things that I want to just precurse is that we've all just told a story from our upbringing and our past. That's how stories are documented in oral tales, folklore, folk history. When Ben's granddad and dad were in Kashmir and your dad was in Scotland, or where was he, in Wales or Scotland?
He's Welsh.
So he's brought up in...
No, he was brought up in London.
Oh, shut up. All right, bruv.
Are you on about Groundskeeper Willie or me dad?
All right, moving on.
Just drop it, all right?
All right. But yeah, so anyways, my message is that that's how stories are transmitted, and you'd have a poet in the village to gatekeep knowledge from ancestors, and that's why you have moms and dads telling stories about this, that and the other, about the local town, so that you don't go and play in the wrong area and there's a monster down there. Do you know what I mean? Don't go down to the quarry because there's a monster that comes out at night. Do you know what I mean?
So like a conduit for the information that
that's
you need
it.
to know.
So
Like griots.
exactly.
Griots.
Exactly.
Griots are storytellers in African folklore. Basically, what we've just done, we'd sit down and we'd tell you a story about my journey and coming back, and then there'll be some moral compass around it, so that the moral compass is for you to recheck yourself, so that when something happens, you go back to the story and remember the story, and then re-evaluate and apply the moral story.
So they're gatekeepers and librarians and soothsayers that relieve tension between war and families.
Yeah.
The words, like a French word, griots. That's my French impression.
Didn't like it.
Sounded rubbish, didn't it? I sounded Mexican. Okay, so anyway, griots.
Yes.
They used to act as like forms of heritage keeping. So that's what hip hop does now, and then in the past. But it just, at the moment, it's sort of keeping a false history that is like an accepted history, or a history that's okay to assign to rap because it's violent and misogynistic. So people aren't really experiencing the full spectrum of what hip hop can offer, and because of that, people have a tainted view over what it can do in a therapeutic space because they only see the negativity.
Yes.
But it's a form of carrying information. And
there was a period of time, I think, I mean, it's, as you said before, it started off as a platform for voices to be heard, angry voices to be heard, and people to speak their mind on things. And then somewhere down the line, people started capitalising off the negativity.
Exactly what I'm talking about, because
It's
it
like-
sells, it's the drama,
Exactly.
it's
And
like
then-
sensational headlines, isn't
And I
it?
think what you're saying is after that generation capitalised on the negative aspect of it, the generation after then took that as
That's
this
what
is
hip-hop-
what hip hop
yeah.
is, and it's gone on from there. And now we're in a world where there's so much crime between
And
the same
you've
the same people that are speaking.
You've got the musical industries that are playing into
Perpetuating it, yeah.
perpetuating the sensationalism of shaking your booty and degrading a woman. As hip hop, as we know, there's a broader compass on it. Hip hop for me was my song guide to the world.
That's it, yeah.
Hip hop to me was my father when they weren't around. You know, slow down, the hip hop tune, slow down, don't rush her and everything, take your time. Then it was a mother to me. You know, you'd have Lady of Rage, you'd have Queen Latifah back
Pharaoh
in the day.
Munch.
Right, there's
Even
so
you
many
said-
different people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, it was important for, like, it's important now, like the work that Kieran's doing. It's so important for people to have a different spin on what hip hop is and what it can be used for is an important tool.
So before we go any further into hip hop, can you share a couple of bars, like a couple of lines, 8 bars that you could?
I'm trying to think of 8 bars because it's been a long time, listeners, that I've wrote, but I haven't performed. I was trying to think of some of my rhymes that I did back then.
If anything springs to mind.
Philosophy cannot feed the belly of a hungry man. I gave you food and knowledge, but you had another plan. Set agenda, I won't defend you. That is come from a piece of a track entitled Valley. And I wrote Valley when I was in a valley. Just like what Kieran was talking about, our lives are quite similar with certain things that we've gone through at different times. I pulled away from music and creativity when my father passed of cancer. And I wrote that track, Valley. I was in the dark, just penning, just sitting down. I think it was like candlelight. I was just chilling and writing. I was just, like you were saying earlier, Kieran, it was like everything shut down. Everything shut down apart from I just had a little bit of energy to just be a little bit creative. So, cut long story short, I wrote this song and I've performed and sang before, but singing wasn't my forte. MCing was. So for this particular song that was evoked for me to write was a song part, singing part. So the first line's, way in the valley, I saw the light. Deep down by the waters, I saw the light. I walked, I screamed, and the angels angels, they picked me up from a bit of pain. I know for sure that I will walk that mountain again. Wait. And then it goes into rhyme. I wrote that because I was in a low place and it was like a message to bring myself out of it. So I walked that mountain again. Things happen in your life, and no matter how hard it is at that time, it is a valuable lesson, even though you don't feel like it is in that period. And writing that song, it made me come alive for a little bit. And a friend of mine who's a producer as well, Prince Jamo, I said to him, he goes, "How you doing, son?" And I was like, "I don't know." Doctors wanted to give me medication because I was just really getting depressed and everything after Dad's passing. Mum got ill and my brother wasn't unwell, so it was just like knock-on effect. And I said to him, I wrote a song. "You wrote a song? You're an MC. You're talking to me about this and that." And I was, yeah. And then he came round and then he saw the depressant tablets. I won't even lie. He saw the depressant tablets. He went, "You are not going to that place." And he took them out the window. I goes, "What are you doing? Some old person might pick them up and the child might get them." And he went, "Yeah, you're awake now. Come on." So anyway, cut long story short, guys, we walked around the reservoir, Edgbaston Reservoir, and I was singing it and rhyming the song to him. And he's like, "Let's go and record it now." I was now. And he went, "Yeah, now." And I went, I can't. He went, "Let's go." Did it.
Did he grab you by the scruff of the neck at that point?
More or less. Because he wasn't having it. He was like, "I'm not seeing you get into this space."
That's what you need. Sometimes.
Yeah.
You need
That's what me and Greg do to each other.
Yeah, sometimes you don't need like, "It's all right, Bab." It's like, get your ass up and come on.
Yeah.
But I know that's a space of fear for me. Like, he's fearful of anything going wrong. So let me just grab her ass and get her going. Cut long story really short from that, guys. Performed it. For the first 5 years, I couldn't perform the song without crying somewhere. I found it difficult. And like Kieran was saying, I performed it emotionless because it was telling my story over and over again in a different way. And then one day I performed, I can't remember where it was now. I think it was in Edinburgh. I performed it in Edinburgh and everything just came back to normal. It normalised.
Wow.
And then after that, I haven't done that for years, that song. But it's allowed me, like we were just saying, hip hop was my therapy to me. When my dad passed, hip hop died to me. It was like, it didn't exist anymore. And then over a period of time, it's re-erected itself.
Do you think that's about denial of your creative self? Because there's something in that.
I think
it's
so.
Almost like almost like you have a flower that you can't appreciate anymore.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like I was such a hip hop head. I used to go to fashion college and jump off the bus and run home and press the recorder for Yo MTV raps, jump back on the bus and go back to college. I used to be the Watson guide knowing about hip hop. I knew everything. But when my dad passed, it just shut down completely. And then I went into a bit of drum and bass rapping. Yeah. Then I went into dance a bit rapping. And I was like, none of these are me. Yeah. But there are elements of, but it's not me. So then I went on my own, journey to find self through that, because it's imperative when you're going through things that are challenging is to know that, it is a journey, it is a process. At the time, you don't know what it is. So like we're here lovingly saying to the listeners, it is a process, and not to be hard on yourself with the process.
Absolutely.
And using music as a therapy is a brilliant way forward.
Yeah, look, you're going to screw up. Don't beat yourself up if you don't go to the gym, if you don't eat a shake, if you don't be sensible one day or 2 days or 10 days. If you have 7 years like me of just absolutely not being yourself, just in chaos, but on the outside, I'm normal kids. Whoa. Do you know what I mean?
High five you to that, Kieran. I was the same. People didn't even know when I'm performing and smiling and working and doing like that. I'm going home and just broken. It's
repression, right? And that's the worst pill to swallow. If you repress those emotions, it's going to be like a boiling kettle where you never turn off that electric element. Right. Once that water's heating, that steam's bubbling, the kettle's whistling, the handles are getting hot, the water's going to get hot. It's going to keep steaming till the water's gone. Then you're going to burn out. You're going to collapse into a fire you're just gonna like, yeah, it's not good, not pretty. So for me, the creativity helped me to avoid that second time round. So yeah, Ben, you've seen that on the streets where people were just gone to the absolute lengths of what they can stand.
I wanted to continue the theme of the wisdom that we can get from people that came before us. And obviously that oral tradition that you talked about is very important in a lot of cultures. And we absorb it, don't we, through the stories that they tell us. Now, I was very fortunate that I spent, both with my mother and father, I spent their last period of time on earth. I was with them almost continuously. With my mom, it was the last 6 months. With my dad, it was the last 7 years. So it's, what I want to say is that the stories that storytellers tell us, with the wisdom, with the moral compass that have come from generations, I mean, from far, far back, they're really important. They carry the thread of the wisdom of the culture. But I think alongside that, something which is, I'm going to call it like preventative medicine, is if you get to know the personality, and for us, it's our mums and dads, it's the storytellers. Because I was having a conversation with someone today, and he was telling me some news, and he goes, "Oh, this could be really exciting." He said,
"Who was the conversation with? As in, was it somebody on the streets?"
No, it wasn't somebody on the streets, but it was with the work of Let's Feed Brum.
Okay.
And there's a potential for us to move forward, and there's a potentially exciting project. So he was saying, I'm trying to stop myself from getting too excited in case it falls through. So I just heard myself say to him, actually, no, let yourself get excited. Because he said, I don't want to be disappointed if I'm let down. And I said, no. Get excited and then let yourself get disappointed, because actually that's
life.
That's what we're meant to do. Don't distance yourself.
Just trying to stand at even keel.
Yeah, and don't try and always be on top of the situation.
It's a false investment.
Yeah, you can't. And I think this is where, if you get to know these older individuals, your mother, your father, because they tell us those stories, but they're always calm, because for them it's past. They're not caught up in it. And I think this is another space or another thing that it's not just about the stories, it's about the people who tell us the stories. And you've got to have that connection with them. Now, I carry my mum and dad with me every single moment of my life. I know them inside out. I couldn't have said that about my dad before the last 5 years of his life, because I left home when I was 18 and I was raring to get away, But later on, I really appreciated him a lot more and understood the struggles he'd gone through and, the things he'd seen. I mean, he'd seen things. He was in India and Pakistan when partition happened. He saw death and horrible things, never spoke to us about those things. So I had a much bigger appreciation of who he was as a man much later on, not when I was a kid growing up in the house, because he was a strong man, but he was also incredibly emotional, so he was not someone who he didn't have that stiff upper lip. He was like up and down like a yo-yo, and sometimes it was great and sometimes it was horrible, but I learned through that experience to value, it's not just the stories, it's the actual people. And you can't help but love your parents. You just love them, don't you? Because that's who they are.
If you're lucky enough to have lovable parents.
If you're lucky to have them, I never knew any of my grandparents, but they're, I guess, if you get to know them as well. And the interesting thing about when my father passed away, the one thing that struck me, I didn't really feel it as a loss because he had lived a long life and I got to know him really well. But it was the length of time. As I said earlier, he was born in 1925. And so suddenly I had this thought and feeling, we are 80, 90 years ahead. And then his grandfather would have probably been born like 18. Do you know what I mean? So we're so wrapped up in now and in our trials and tribulations of now that we need to give some thought and space to the fact that everybody before us has passed through stuff. You know,
I'd just say the power of what you just said in getting to know your parents and getting to know your family while you can, because, you know, I grew up with both my parents in my household. When I was 10 years old, my dad was in an RTA. He was a different person after. He had brain damage. He could hardly walk. He couldn't work again. He wasn't the same dad that I knew up to 10 years old. He was as I said, he was a caretaker. He was groundskeeper Willie. Like he was active, you know. And after that, he wasn't. So from 10 to 20 years old, I knew a different person from what I grew up with. I remember who he was. And I see a lot of myself, a lot of him in myself now, the early days. But the brain damaged dad was not the same. I still loved him and he still had a lot to offer. He still taught me things and he just had to come with a different approach. Now, towards the end of my teens, from probably 16 to 20, you don't want to know your parents. You're not interested. You want to be out of the house and doing your thing. Yeah. So we're talking about like the last, say, 4 years of his life. I didn't know him and I didn't get to know him and I didn't learn things about him. I didn't learn everything that he had to teach me. So when I was 21 and he passed away, it hurt at the time. I wasn't bothered because I wasn't like getting along very well with him. It wasn't until I hit 30 that I thought, there's so much things he could have taught me. There's so much things that I don't know about him that I wish I could. And when they're gone, that's it. That's it. As you were saying, like they're a library, they're a fountain of knowledge. Like when they're gone, they're gone. So I just want to say, put it out there. Get to know your parents and love and cherish them while they're still around, regardless of what you're going through and what they've said and what they've said you can't do. Yeah,
definitely.
Cherish them.
I think hip hop serves that function for a lot of teens when your parents are just basically grinding on you. You hate them, everything they say, smell, wear, cook.
There's a lyric Common says, rap music in the hood plays the fatherly role.
I was going to say that bloody Marcus Rashford got that awful tweet back off that guy, the horrible MP, who was talking about school meals. And then the guy was like, well, blah, 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 absent black fathers. Just because you didn't get to know your dad, whatever, don't.
How immature.
It's just people running the
country. That's for an adult who's in a high position.
Well, why don't you say what you think? Why don't you say what you think? Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Let it all run out. But then there's no shame or backlash, do you know what I mean? And it's, to be fair, we're lucky it's just a tweet.
Sickening.
But does it need to be the tweet? You know, it's bad enough that it's just the tweet, but it is a tweet that's gone out worldwide.
It's disgusting.
On a level that you'd be like, in this time, especially in this pandemic and what people are going through and the struggles, the oppressions, the murders that's happening through black people, not just black people, throughout the world, many different people are being hurt because of their colour, their belief, their sexuality, whatever it may be. And if you have somebody in a high prestigious position to come out with that,
to the point where they don't feel like they're going to be called out and it's okay, I'm safe, I can just say what I want.
So what does it say about society itself?
But that is the you know, social media, particularly Twitter as well, is something which is, it's almost like it's a TV channel and anyone can say what they like. I mean, it's not policed, is it?
Yeah.
No.
It's not controlled by anybody. It's supposedly, they don't care. Yeah. They just care that there's more subscribers. So I think that sometimes what we get now is we get a lot of voices and thoughts that wouldn't have been heard before because people would have stopped themselves. But to some degree, and I think we touched on this before, I kind of think that at least it's there and we know it's there, because if you know it's there, then you know what the problem is, you know, and that is better than it being hidden.
Well, this is it. You've got the counter to that is if people don't speak up in outrage, then things happen where black men get knees on their necks and then nobody sees and nobody shouts. But because there's another side to, you know, social media where people are able to make voice and change, and it's a two-way roundabout in it. And this guy, this horrible MP whose name I'm not even going to mention, he's able to tweet like that now. If it was 200 years ago, he'd be carrying bodies across the bloody seas.
Yeah, you know, can you make the comparison? Because we're in a, you know, 200 years ago, the gossip around the village. I mean, it would have been different from village to village because.
No, I mean he'd be a slave trader because he's a member of parliament, and
but what I'm saying is that exactly.
Or watch out for the libel.
Yeah, I mean it's like this is when you're trying to like, so 200 years ago and now it's this, or 100 years ago. We can only, it's like
trying to speculate, but
we're kind of, we are where we are now. That's what we were talking about. We're just like, you know, we're in this, we're consumed with what's going on today.
Yeah.
This is what we're facing today. And so we extrapolate that backwards, you know, 100, 200, 300, 400.
It's imaginary.
You know, back to my father's case, it's like he grew up in a completely different world and adapted to this one, you know, and actually I think he was a lot more resilient than any of our generation, honestly.
Of course.
He would, things could happen, you know. I mean, he hasn't been around for the pandemic, you know, everyone's freaking out. He'd have just glided through it. I know he would have, because I saw that in him, and it wouldn't have been emotionless. But it is also, I think it's important for us to use what we've been given, you know, to be intelligent. So that guy, he just needed to be, that thinking just needed to be just put in its place. And that's it. Because actually you don't want to waste too much energy on it, because now you're wasting energy on it. Now you're riling yourself up, and now that's not making it any better, is it?
It's so disappointing, isn't it? It's so disappointing to see someone in a privileged position who should know better, and you expect more from, to come out with something like that.
100
that will perpetuate
100 years ago.
You can't suppress
100 years
that
ago,
spirit anymore.
100 years ago, the leaders of this country were sending 1 million, 2 million of the young men to pointless deaths. People in positions of power, you know. They were doing it. They've always been doing it.
Can't be surprised about it.
You know, it's not something to be surprised at. It's something which is like, wake up to it.
Okay, so you're one of them. I just think you're...
Yeah, it's funny because it's like,
one of those
unlike America, why I would say I respect the racism in America is because they show it you, and if they don't like me, they don't like me.
Yeah, it's fun up in your face. You can deal with it. If it's insidious under the carpet, you can't do anything about it.
British way of dealing with racism. Yes. To go on it and come off it really quickly. What for me, when the pandemic happened, I'm a faith-led person. I was like, well, what's this? What is this about, really, God? What is the reason for this? There's got to be something else that's coming, not just the pandemic. And then when I watched the murdering of George Floyd, I went, that's it, isn't it? Because within a week, you have racism, murders happening throughout the world all year round.
All the time.
Years upon years upon years. And it was, I'm not saying, this is my philosophy. This whole thing, how it's been formed or manifested, it's here. And we're living in it. But divinely timed was a moment where everybody, like that politician perhaps, was all sitting down on their phone watching TV. The kids were on their laptop or their iPad. Everybody was interacting digitally. Therefore, when something happens, you can't be blind by it. You're not busy going to get a latte, prate, whatever they're called.
You're seeing it.
You're seeing it. So with this pandemic, the shift of everything is immense as far as I'm concerned, because everyone's seen it. Every person saw it. What usually doesn't see takes a blind eye to racism, and the echo of it is amplified. So, you know, it's sad, the suffering and the murder of one person has allowed everybody to look at things differently, in a different perspective.
Yeah. Can I just say one thing? I think touching on what you were saying about giving energy to it,
Yeah.
I think that there's something in giving energy to racism, like as a whole. Now, I'm not saying ignore it. I'm not saying that it's not there. I'm just saying that the more we give energy to it, the more we fuel it, the more we talk about it, the more it becomes apparent, the more the divide builds, right? So, yes, some people feel a way about people, and yes, some people feel inferior, some people feel superior. You're going to have them people in all walks of life, all races, anything.
Yeah.
If we focus on racism as a barrier between us, then we're giving it strength. If we think, I'm not going to say it doesn't exist, but if we think, right, yeah, you said this about that, but you're just ill-advised, or you've been educated differently to I have. So, okay, whatever. I can try and educate you a little bit. If you're not willing to listen, then we're not the right people for each other. We're not the same tribe, you know. But I think there's something in what you said about the pandemic happening, and then everyone's focus being on the media, and then that happening. That's exactly what I'm trying to say. You're focused on it more, so you're worrying about it more, and it's dividing people more because people are taking sides, and the police are doing their job. And go on.
Sorry,
Go on,
you got my mind going now.
Go on.
Yeah, in one breath, yes, agree, and in the next breath, I'd say we have never in our history had racism spoken to on this level. We have never, I'm 50 years old, I have never seen a statue being pulled down in regards to the slave trade. Yes. I've never seen that in my whole lifetime. I have never seen a multitude of people saying, this is not right. It doesn't care if it was a white man's head on the floor or an Indian man's head on the floor. That act was wrong. It just happens now that this is something that happens continually. So for me, the conversation has to continue, because I had a friend of mine, an Irish friend, and she phoned me in tears saying, oh my God, Sandra, how have you been coping? We spoke for 2.5 hours. I think it was till 2 o'clock in the morning. And I said, I love you. I'll keep her name out of it. I love you so much because you see me. She says, when I say certain things, she understands why I'm saying it. And she realised how racist a lot of things within her environment is. And we spoke about the whole thing. So what it's done for a majority of people, I feel, is opened up their hearts. So yes, like the media, I watched a show called Social Dilemmas on Netflix, worth a watch, guys, about social media. It has its weaknesses and it has its strengths. So for me, it's important. We always have to jazz hand. We don't have to jazz hand anymore. And what I mean by that, listeners, is when something happens in regards to straight racism in front of your face, most black people just smile and get on with it because it's a norm, when it shouldn't be a norm for anybody. Everybody's supposed to walk and be how they are, but we've become so jazz hands about it. But that's trauma. So we're carrying trauma. But a lot of us, like you was rightfully saying earlier, it's what you focus on. We've all grown up in different environments ourselves, and our parents, our families, our youth workers, whoever it may be, they made us focus on the prize of life, love, integrity, maturity, values, manners, respect, community driven, all these things that embeds us with love, because they know what is out there for us. So for the time that we're living in now, yes, I agree again, you can't constantly focus on something like that, but you mustn't turn a blind eye.
100%.
Yeah, and that's what that beautiful piece of work that you put out earlier is an echo and a testament of that. That's another voice continuing. We're here. The reason why I think, sorry for going on. Reason why I'm passionate about it, because I'm a person of colour. I work with all young people and I teach young people the same level of manners. Don't care who you are, where you come from, have manners. And the thing is why it's important for us, like we're saying, we're the next generation that can take it like you were saying about your father. There's things that happen in our life that we can sit down and speak in a calm way. When we know that we've cried, we've got sick about the situation itself, but we're in a place now to re-educate them how to deal with it.
Elevate everyone.
And elevate anyone. Elevate in a different way. Yeah.
Everyone.
Yeah, it's a different shift happening. Yes, you're not gonna get rid of prejudice and racism, sexism, homophobia, and that's never going, because that's life.
Yeah.
But what we have to understand is, how can we navigate through this thing called life? Because as much as good things happen, tragic things happen, happy things, sad things, it's how you manoeuvre.
There's beauty in it as well, and I'd say there's not beauty in racism, sexism, homophobia, etc. There's beauty in the opposition of opinions. There's beauty in learning why people have come to think that way, and learning why people feel a certain way. Because if we were all thinking the same way and we were all on the same page, then we would not. Or if we all spoke openly about the same things and on the same page, then there would be nothing to learn of each other. There would be nothing to learn of our differences. I think what I'm trying to say is, definitely don't turn a blind eye to. That's not what I was getting at.
No, I didn't think it was. Yeah.
I was just trying to say, like, things like the media will have you focus on certain things so hard that it will drive you to distraction.
This is definitely watch that program I talked about, and that's sorry.
That's all right. I was just going to say, I think the other word you used as well when you were describing it also hits the nail on the head. Going on around us, there is a tactic, and it's called division.
Yeah, and fear.
And that's what I sense from reading what I read over the last, it's been going on for years, but it's intensified. And I remember right at the beginning of the pandemic, and I was talking with a group of friends, and this was put forward. This looks like an exercise in the psychology of fear.
And so tactic.
Machiavelli.
Tactic.
Divide and conquer.
There is an agenda, and we've got to understand that these agendas, because and I dare say we're I think we are basically ordinary people here, and we're just getting on with our lives the best that we can, following the passions that we have. But there are people who have agendas, and they have a plan for us, and they don't want us to be friends with each other, and they want us to have an issue with each other. And so being aware of that, I think, is a powerful thing.
If we don't have issues with each other, capitalism doesn't work. Because if we're driving along the street and we're comfortable in our metro, whatever, Mercedes don't sell. Do you know what I mean?
So,
status.
To all the teachers and counsellors and people in power and authority who get to choose what other people do, listening now, it's not based on our mental agility or our ability to express ourselves that we're, able to navigate these minefields in life at the moment. It's whether you're dodging the bullet in the right place at the right time because of your upbringing, who your mum and dad were, what class system you belong in. And the therapeutic powers of music and art and craft and whatever it is, going for a walk in the allotments. That's where we need to be focusing our energies right now. So listeners, take control of where you're at. Root yourself in the morning. Pick out 10 things that you love doing, like a food that you like having for breakfast, or a certain scent that you like wearing, or whatever it is that gives you a boost. And just make sure every day you've got a couple of those things ticked off your list that you've done before you do anything else. It's a self-care routine that I've been using for 90 days now today. I think we're on day 92, 90, summer or nothing. But so what we were saying earlier about the being easy on yourself, being kind to yourself, anybody in the world could be mean to you. If you're not being kind to yourself, cheerleading on the sidelines of your own life, raising the little pom-poms and doing a little twirl for yourself, then why should you expect anybody else to? So get off your own back, give yourself a break, and just Forget all the things that you've got to do in the morning for everybody else. Just set the alarm 15 minutes before. And if you want to bust out some tunes and have a little skank in your bedroom, just knock on the door and let the other people around you know that that's what's going to happen, and just do it. Because you got one life. Seize it. Carpe diem. Dubgasm is on Saturday the 3rd of October, and we're bringing people together because life revolves around music, creativity, joy, happiness, beauty, inspiration. Those are the things that are going to get you through at the moment. So it's an event that I hold every year in celebration of my sister's life. So Pam, big up yourself. Thank you for helping me with this gift. Dubgasm wouldn't have come if you'd gone. So I've got to give thanks and feel blessed because the people that come together and the community of artists and MCs that support for free, the club that supports, that normally hosts us, that's now closed, PST, that rhymed. Yeah, we want to say thank you for giving up your time and helping us to raise money for the homeless, for the bereaved. We're going to put on MC workshops, and yeah, Applz. You know, if you're around on Saturday the 3rd of October, maybe you could pop by and maybe drop a few bars. Like,
Rice, quick, give me some tasks now. I'm gonna write something. Yeah.
Well, I'm keen to hear some of your bars on some drum and bass or jungle. Actually,
okay.
Do you fancy putting you on the spot now? Because I didn't ask you before, but
not now. No. I've got a drum and bass one actually. When you were saying that, there's a track that I worked with a guy called Silent Space. Yeah,
okay.
It was called Soldier On.
Can you send us some of your old tunes that we could put in the podcast to finish off? So, which one do you think you'd like to play?
I mean, I've given them a little bit about Valley, so I'll send you the whole of Valley.
I was gonna ask you for that anyways. I'm kind of glad you said that.
Yeah. And it's funny, if I wanted to say really quickly, the song Valley, a friend of mine was going through a really hard breakdown, and months on, I saw her and she said, "Your song," I was playing it and it brought me up, and I burst into tears to her, like, you don't even know where I was when I made that. So for that, I'm so blessed if it's just for you, if I've made that song just for you.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty. To echo what Kieran's doing is amazing. It's allowing you all to understand how important you are, despite circumstances and challenges that surface in your life, because they always will. It's just to grasp the things that are beautiful and make them better for yourself. Second, and I applaud Kieran for her work.
Oh, thank you.
It's amazing, and I look forward to seeing how it will evolve as well.
Yeah, I'm so blessed that you came on, to be fair. And what you said about the mountain in the valley, the whole reason that we're here now doing this podcast is because I did a meditation. I thought about how I was going to pull myself out of a dark time, remembering my sister, and then I came up with the visualization of a mountain. And so I went through and got the 36 chambers of hip-hop, wisdom, invisible scrolls, and as a seeker on a hero's journey, I collected the wisdom from the MCs. So that's the reason you're sitting in here. And isn't that mad? You're the first one in the 36 chambers. So we're going to have 36 MCs and 36 episodes. And you're going to hear 36 stories from 36 absolutely real individuals that are going to be able to pass the wisdom of ancient sage MCs down to you in Glow with the Flow podcast.